There is a limit to what the United States in self-respect can endure. That limit has now been reached.
The Eisenhower administration responded by closing their embassy and breaking all ties to Castro's Cuba. But that wasn't all. As Kennedy would learn, the Eisenhower administration was determined to bring Castro down.
Soon after the elections, it became necessary to brief President-elect Kennedy on vital security matters. I was then director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and I remember meeting him in the Kennedy home in Palm Beach. He was visibly sobered by the information I brought him. No one who has not held the office can comprehend the burdens and the problems a president must face.
For a full year, the Eisenhower administration had been planning an invasion of Cuba, using disenfranchised anti-Castro Cubans as their fighting force. In transferring power to Kennedy, the Eisenhower administration also transferred this secret plan. It became known as the Bay of Pigs.
This is Ron Oppen in Miami. I'm standing in one of the many anti-Castro recruiting places scattered throughout the city. Since 2 o'clock this morning, men and boys have been filing through this door behind me, anxious to join the fight in Cuba against Fidel Castro's government. Once inside that small, overcrowded room, they're measured for uniforms, personal data is taken, including next of kin, and the men are told where to assemble for the jumping off to Cuba. No one here will talk about just when it will be, but one official told me he expects it to be sometime tonight.
Cuban revolutionary troops such as these have invaded Castro's leftist island fortress, reportedly rallied by a mysterious coded radio message. Alert, alert, look well at the rainbow. The fish will be running very soon. From the sea and by parachute, the rebels have struck along the coast within 90 miles of Havana. Initial accounts of the fighting sketchy, but strafing and bombing of communications and military targets reported with heavy casualties. Fidel's grip is threatened as word of some defections comes out. But the fiery bearded Castro is hardly short on words as he attacks what he calls United States imperialism and calls on sister Latin American republics to aid Cuba.
I've said as much as I feel can be usefully said by me in regard to the events of the past few days. Further statements, detailed discussions are not to conceal responsibility because I'm the responsible officer of the government, but merely because and that is quite obvious, but merely because I do not believe that such a discussion would benefit us during the present difficult situation.
The Bay of Pigs was a serious and embarrassing failure for the Kennedy administration and had the unforeseen effect of making Castro even stronger within his new country. Castro used this opportunity to make his ideological stand official. On May 1st, 1961, he declared Cuba to be a communist state. This declaration shifted the dynamic of the conflict. The United States was no longer supporting counter-revolutionary elements against Castro. It was now defending its boundaries against worldwide communist aggression.
The Bay of Pigs was a total CIA operation. The CIA thought they could stir an uprising in Cuba, total misjudgment of Castro's popular support. Alan Dulles, the head of the CIA, and Richard Bissell, the fellow who was in charge of the CIA, planning the CIA operation, came to him and laid out the plans. And Kennedy thought that it, as he put it, it was too noisy an operation. He wanted it to be done much more surreptitiously, and he wanted it to be done so that the United States could disavow any connection to it at all. What was done was that Dulles and Bissell eventually planned the landing at the Bay of Pigs so that it would fail if, in fact, Kennedy didn't permit not only air support, but major intervention, major ground forces, U.S. ground forces, to become a part of it. And they never believed Kennedy wouldn't do that. When Kennedy didn't go along at the height of the crisis, the operation failed. And as a result of that, Kennedy became totally disillusioned with the CIA. And he became even angrier at Castro, who kept rubbing his nose in it.
After the Bay of Pigs, he was so annoyed with the CIA that he said that he'd like to rip the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind.
Kennedy did not dismantle the CIA. He did, however, try to control it and make it his own. He fired the key Eisenhower appointees such as Director Allen Dulles, Deputy Director and Air Force General Charles P. Cable, and Deputy Director of Plans Richard Bissell. And he looked for his own man to run the agency.
Kennedy, after the Bay of Pigs, was very concerned about the CIA, which had been the author of this plan, which Eisenhower had approved. And Kennedy couldn't really get out of it, or felt he couldn't get out of it. He was searching for some person. He thought for a moment that he would send Robert Kennedy to run the CIA. But Robert Kennedy declined that. He said he thought it would be a great mistake to send a Democrat and a brother to run the CIA. So they settled on John McCone. He felt it was an agency out of control.
But Kennedy never truly brought the agency under control, and his defeat at the Bay of Pigs made him susceptible to a new and intense criticism.
Developments in Red Cuba, 90 miles from the shores of Florida, hold more ominous warnings for a sleeping American public. While the deadly enemies of the American people close in for their final stages of encircling our nation, enemy nations within intensify efforts to chip away the foundations upon which American freedom rests. More and more strange voices call for surrendering of our national sovereignty to some type of world authority. There are increasing efforts to centralize authority in the federal government in Washington, D.C. under the guise of federal aid.
Of all the defeats in the Cold War, the capture of Cuba by the communists is the most unacceptable. Super patriots knew Castro was a communist in 1957. But moderate patriots, such as the State Department, haven't admitted it yet.
If we could get our government to stop helping the communists everywhere in the world while pretending to do the opposite, for just 6 months, the whole communist worldwide empire would start falling to pieces. That's all we would have to do.
The attacks of the radical right were hurting Kennedy, who was becoming more and more ineffective and defensive. With picketers heckling him outside a Los Angeles conference center, he started to lash out.
Now we are face to face once again with a period of heightened peril. The risks are great, the burdens heavy, the problems incapable of swift or lasting solution. And under the strains and frustrations imposed by constant tensions and harassment, the discordant voices of extremism are once again heard in the land. Men who are unwilling to face up to the danger from without are convinced that the real danger is from within. They look suspiciously at their neighbors and their leaders. They call for a man on horseback because they do not trust the people. They find treason in our churches, in our highest court, in our treatment of water. They equate the Democratic Party with the welfare state, the welfare state with socialism, socialism with communism. They object, quite rightly, to politics intruding on the military, but they are very anxious for the military to engage in their kind of politics.
Unsure of his powers and unable to run with his policies, Kennedy tried to silence these critics by fighting the Cold War on their terms.